Hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to Something Positive for Positive People, the podcast where I interview people living with STDs about their personal experience in dating, their careers, life, and whatever else there is to talk about. Today I am here with Cassie. Cassie, how old are you?
I am 29.
And what is your relationship status?
I am dating.
Career field?
Waitress.
Sexual preference?
Mostly straight.
And I said career field. And there's always like two more things that I always forget, and I try to do these off the top of my head.
I understand.
29 years old. And
Positive.
what positive?
I have.
Look at that. You listen. You reminded me.
I have HSV2, and I've also dealt with HPV in one form or another before, too.
Okay. Well, before we get started, first I want to thank you for inviting me into your home so that we can do this. And, of course, thank you for sharing your story with me. I will admit, driving up here, I kind of had flashbacks to the movie Get Out on all those windy roads and shit.
I thought you might.
And I do not come to this part of town. Oh, that's what I didn't say. So where are you from? Obviously, St. Louis.
I am from St. Louis.
All right. Now, let's talk about your condition. So you were diagnosed with HSV2 and HPV. So how long have you been diagnosed?
12 years.
It's been 12 years?
I found out that I was HSV2 positive in 2006.
How'd you find out?
I went to the doctor and asked to get a full panel.
So you requested the full panel. You already knew what you needed to ask for when you got there.
Generally speaking, I knew all of the basics because I'd been tested plenty of times before. And I inquired about herpes specifically because you just don't hear much about it. And the doctor said, and I'm going to go into a little bit of detail just because I've heard you go into detail about it before on your other podcasts. The doctor was kind of like, well, unless you're having an active outbreak, we don't really test for that.
Right.
And I said, but can you? And she said, we can run an antibody screening. So I said, well, let's do it.
Uh-huh. And so it's kind of like you had to, I don't want to say pull teeth, but you had to ask very specifically in order to get your sexual health status update.
I did.
And did she explain, like, why? She just said, well, I guess we could. That's what it seems like to me. It seems like you asked, hey, can you, because similar situation, I went to the Sprint store to get an iPhone, this phone actually, swapped out because my camera was broken. They gave me a defective phone. I go in there and I'm like, hey, can I have another phone? Another lady goes in. After they tell me, no, we don't have any more, she asks for an iPhone. They bring her an iPhone. And I'm like, I'm pissed at this point because I just asked them and they bring this out to her. So I was like, do you not have any more phones? He's like, no. I was like, you just told me you didn't, and this lady comes in and gets a phone. So then I get very specific. I'm like, do you not have this phone in this gigabyte? It's like, no. This color? Yes. And he was like, yeah, we have one more phone eventually. But, like, I had to pull teeth for that shit. So that was frustrating. So I can only imagine how frustrating it was to have to go into such detail to get tested for herpes.
So for her specifically, and I was seeing my nurse practitioner, or the nurse practitioner I was seeing at the time, for her specifically, their reason behind it was if we do the antibody blood test, we don't have any point of reference for where you may have outbreaks, may be active, where you may be able to transfer it from. You just know that at some point your body's come in contact with the herpes simplex virus and started producing antibodies for it. So I think for the medical field, a lot of times when they do that, part of it is to not put people in a position.
Yeah.
Some people, I know I've had friends of friends who say like, oh, I have this type of herpes simplex virus that I take a cyclovir for, blah, blah, and I get it like behind my knee or in my elbow. As weird as that sounds.
It's not weird. I heard of someone having it on their ankle.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for them, they're like, we're going to have this person scared shitless. Pardon me. So.
Yeah, and I've heard that before as well, but not specifically out of the mouth of a medical professional. It's just like a common theory about why why medical professionals just would rather not find out, especially with it being so common, because when you do find out, your world is pretty much shaken up. So was that the case for you?
My world being shaken up?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay. But it was also a long time ago. Resources were very different, in my opinion, 12 years ago than what they are now. You go to do a Google search then, and what you had access to was very different.
All those images.
That was, I mean, that was literally like pre-Facebook, I think. You know, or
Ish.
before I was on Facebook. My Facebook just notified me I'd been on it for 10 years. I've had herpes longer than I've had Facebook.
That is not a common statement. That is not one at all. All right, so you get diagnosed. You find out you have HSV2. What do you do?
I was a hot mess at the time.
Did you tell anyone, or did you have any idea where it could have come from?
No, I went back and forth about where it could have come from. But I also hadn't had an outbreak.
Okay.
To that point. I was seeing somebody at the time, and I hadn't slept with them yet. When I found out I was positive, I told them that I had just had this blood test done, that my blood shows positive for the antibodies, but I don't know if or where it shows how I came in contact with it, or if I could ever give it to somebody.
I love the way you just said that. Like, my blood has come into contact with the antibodies for HSV, because that sounds way better than I have herpes. And it's so, like, scientific, and it's like the way a person would receive that versus I have herpes is just completely different. So, sorry, go on.
Well, how else do you say it other than I mean, well, and when you think about it like that, I've had kids, and for what it's worth, our parents' generation, you got herpes, and people are like, you don't need to have kids. Like, that was like sort of the norm, for our parents' generation. If you had genital herpes, like, there was this, like, I've, like, actually met people where they're like, they were so scared of what could happen if they gave birth. And
that's just if you have vaginal birth, isn't it? Like, if you were having an active outbreak, the chances of spreading it to the newborn child are very high. Whereas if you have a C-section, wouldn't it be okay? Is that not what the...
Generally speaking, yeah. If there are signs of an outbreak, you go C-section. But I don't think that was like the general thought process.
Right.
30 years ago.
Okay.
Because I've met people who... Sorry.
You're fine.
Who, one of the reasons they say I never had kids was because one of the first people I ever, like, just randomly, like a stranger, I was like, oh, why didn't you ever decide to have kids? And she was like, I have herpes.
Oh,
and I was
shit.
like, and then I kind of pulled her aside, and I was like, me too.
Oh.
That was a few years after diagnosis. So.
What was the look on her face when you said that? I'm always like,
I think
people do this. It's not just me.
I think she was one of the first people I ever met who was kind of openly positive. She was like this, like, badass artist lady with awesome big red curly hair, and I think
like super hippie.
She just kind of owned her shit.
Yeah.
Like, she was like, you could tell she had been open and honest about it and probably her sexuality, generally speaking, for a very long time, and it was one of my first sort of introductions to that, which was really cool too.
Oh, awesome. So how was disclosing for you, like, and sharing that you have herpes? How was your experience in telling other people that? Because when we spoke, you're pretty open about it, I would say.
I am.
Okay. So that was a positive first experience-ish, let's say that. And in dating, so how did that change for you? So you told the first person, that you developed the antibodies for HSV2, and they found it in your blood. How did he or she respond to that?
With caution, but we still proceeded to see. I think we dated for a few months after that. We always used protection, and generally speaking, we were cautious, but it wasn't something we thought much about. And then a little while after me and him broke up, I slept with somebody I had slept with a year prior.
Right.
And literally 3 days, maybe 3 or 4 days later, I went to the doctor with an active outbreak. So it made me really, I think that's kind of the scary thing about HSV, and it's part of why people have a really hard time figuring out all of the ins and outs of it, because you don't know exactly where it came from. You can come in contact with it and not have an outbreak for an extremely long amount of time. You can have an outbreak and think it's an ingrown hair. That happens a lot too.
Yeah, I see that a lot of that in different blogs and forum posts where people are like, is this an ingrown hair or is it herpes? I'm like, dude, just go to the doctor and find out, or, err on the side of caution.
Well, and really, because when you think about health class, 15 years ago, when you think about a herpes outbreak, you think about this like big boisterous thing, and it really first time mine hurt more than anything, but it actually looked like it initially, because I was a very thorough person, so I was like all
all in
checking
your
it out,
junk.
and it looked like 4 little pin pricks, like it looked like somebody poked me with a pin 4 times initially, like for the first couple of days, and then it kind of changed a little bit from there, but it didn't look like blisters
Right.
per se.
It didn't look like the extremely gruesome images that you would find today when you Google something. And I'm sure 13 years ago, the images were much worse. So, like, you had that in your head. You didn't think is what herpes looks like.
Right, and had I not had the positive antibody test to know that that's what it was, I'm naturally, like most people, I'm really prone to, like, my body doesn't like it when I shave anyway. So I've always had problems with, like,
Razor burn, razor bumps, those kinds of
yes.
things. We can leave it at that.
So for me, had I not gone out of my way to get the blood test done, I don't know that I necessarily would have known or gone to get that tested as quickly as I did. And then there's the issue of, if you have something that happens, if you wait too long to go get it tested,
Yeah.
you can lose the active surface virus. So you could be getting swabbed later, get a false negative. There's so many things, and
It's just so tricky. It's really, really tricky.
it really, really is. And I don't know. So I don't know if it was the guy that I had been seeing that I dated on 2 different occasions, a year apart, or if it was from something previous or not really.
Yeah. So you've moved on from that. So I'm assuming that like you're past it. You don't care where it came from. You've dealt with it. You're living with it. You have 2 children.
I do.
And let me ask, this is personal, feel free to not answer this, but did you have a vaginal birth?
Both times.
Okay. And did they come out cleared of possibly having HSV?
So, yes, as far as I know, I had never had a reason to test anything that happens with either one of them to see whether or not it's HSV. With that being said, something that's curious is that even if you are HSV positive, if you have a baby, getting a blood test on them done after you have them doesn't really do you a whole lot of good, because theoretically you should have shared those antibodies with them anyway. So if you're testing the baby, if you have the stronger your immune system is, generally speaking, or the longer you've had it, the longer your body's had to build up antibodies for the virus, the less likely, and the stronger the antibodies, ideally, you'd think, the babies should be as well when you're giving birth.
Yeah. And mind you guys, we are not medical professionals. We are only speaking from experience. And I don't think I say that enough when on this podcast, unless I have like a medical professional on. Like, it just commonality here. I am not a medical professional, and if there's a guest on here who is, then I will make sure to make note of that. So just wanted to throw that disclaimer out there. So you've had kids. How was dating for you? Because that was one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about, was that you've disclosed several times, and even in some cases you've rejected other people even if they were okay with it. Is that right?
I have.
All right. So what it takes a really strong positive mindset and high self-esteem to be able to do that, because so many people think, oh my God, I have herpes, nobody's ever going to want me. And then here you are with, disclosing, and people are like, yeah, still, I don't care. And you're like, nah,
I think I've had both ends of the spectrum, because earlier in my life, earlier in the diagnosis, I dealt with the trying to find somebody who will accept you and be okay with it, and then kind of dealing with all of the challenges that come along with that when it's not necessarily where you're supposed to be. But I was really lucky that when I got single, I had a lot of guy friends who, just from being out more than what I had been, I was around. And if somebody showed any interest, I kind of made it a point to I kind of hit a point where I was like, I just have to be able to talk about it, and I have to have that out on the table, because nobody wants to lead people on or anything like that. And I had a couple of really good guys that I would consider friends who were like, I don't mind that. But I was also at a point where I wasn't looking to settle down or be in a long-term relationship. I've dealt with what happens when somebody is afraid that you've passed something on to them, and the fear that happens for them. And for me, you kind of get to pick, and you get to choose who that risk is worth taking with.
All right, I get
Did
what
I
you're
say
saying.
that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, you did. You choose who is worth taking the risk with, is what we meant to say, right?
Yes.
Okay, we said the same things. We just said it. One said it faster than the other.
I mean, because it really is. It's a big sort of commitment. It's a big responsibility in a sense. You're taking, as with any sex act, for what it's worth, whether you're positive or not, or you know you're positive or you don't.
Yeah.
Like, when you have sex with somebody, you share things. You share energy. You share fluid. You share potential viruses. You potentially share children. Like, there are a
Yeah.
whole lot of things that happen when you exchange sex.
Yeah, so
So,
it's like if you wouldn't share your toys with them, well, damn, that is a terrible way of saying that now. I was talking to somebody about like how friends were made recently, and it's like when you're a kid, it's just so easy. You know, you go up to, for girls, like now, girls are like, I can't make friends. And when you're a little kid, it's like as easy as, I like your hair. Oh, thank you. You want some animal crackers? And now here we are as like adults. When I say sharing toys, it means something completely different. So screw that. But yeah, you're right. I agree with you. When you're with someone, we are sharing a lot of things. We're sharing bodily fluids. We're sharing our space, our time, our energy, and potential viruses, just like you said. And so I think that one of the most important things to do really is like people use the term safe sex. There's really no such thing as safe sex. There's only safer sex. And that's not all the time just from condom usage, because you can use a condom and still contract the virus. There's the use of condoms and it breaking and, you know, someone still contracting an STD or getting pregnant. There's just all these different scenarios. So really the safer form of sex, well, I would say the safest, is knowing where you stand, understanding what your sexual health is, and being open and communicative with potential partners or your partner, whatever it is that, whatever type of situation you're in, and being able to just honestly communicate like, hey, here's where I stand, where do you stand, and then bam, go from there. Because I mean, I'm not going to say I've always used condoms, but I mean, here I am in this position right now, but it could have been from condom usage. And like, I don't know where I got HSV2 from. When I was diagnosed 6 years ago, like, I just didn't know. And so, more than anything, guys, just communicate with your potential partners. And I know that you get in the heat of the moment, or you're hooking up, or just like out dating or whatever, and nobody really wants to have that uncomfortable conversation, but it's good to have. And that's how you practice safer sex. Rant done.
so important. And I mean, with that being said, I have this sort of crazy theory that I think, I almost think that condom sex gives you a false sense of security. Um, my current partner uh, has scarring where you can see where he's had an outbreak, where it is not where a condom would protect you.
Mm,
I know for a fact that I've had outbreaks in places where condoms would not protect me. Shaving is a big part of skin-borne issues too, because you're creating micro cuts
yeah.
somewhere where you're already putting a whole lot of friction.
Mm,
And so that's one thing that I did talk about a lot whenever I was disclosing to potentially negative people, because I'm not one of the people who's ever had, I don't think I've ever been with somebody and had them get like a full panel blood test beforehand to like prove their negative status as far as antibodies go for herpes.
yeah.
But I have had people where I can safely say, I can like confidently say that between condoms, my antivirals, knowing my body, being conscious of it, like I know I don't have an ingrown hair that's actually herpes happening right now.
Right.
As crazy as that sounds. So, not to say that somebody who thinks they're negative but doesn't get full panels run regularly isn't negative, just to say that in a sense you're almost safer sleeping with someone you know is positive, who takes precautions, is conscious of their body, understands what's
Yes.
happening with it.
Yes, and you're not the first person to say that. So like that is an experience-based statement that I've heard on multiple occasions, where it's like, I know what my status is. Granted, it's not what you would want to hear, but I understand what precautions need to be made. I'm taking those precautions, and you're probably safer with me than someone who doesn't really know, and they just tell you, oh, I'm fine, I'm negative, I don't have anything, I'm clean. That's the big one.
There's another thing I really wanted to touch on with this if you
Go
don't mind,
ahead.
or we
Yeah.
could save it for another.
No, we can talk now.
So a big thing is that for me, because I've had disclosures where like I work in the restaurant industry, so I talk to a lot of people, and I hit a point where part of me getting more vocal about it, talking more about it, educating people more about it was when I first started, when I got separated from my ex-husband 3 years ago, a little over 3 years ago now. And when I did, I was like really struggling with dating, and I was very vocal about it. I'm very vocal about things I struggle with, because any sort of information I can bring in or get out that can help me fix things, I'm all about it. And people would always wonder like why I was struggling so much, and I finally just hit the point where like I got that like the butterflies in my stomach, and I went through the panic, and I just said it like, this is why I have herpes, and this is why dating is so hard for me right now. And the thing is, I've disclosed to people and had them say, oh, me too. And then I'm like, so how do you deal with dating? Because I know that they're a little more casual with certain things just because we've talked about it. And for them, I've had one situation where the person was like, honestly, if I'm not going to be in a committed relationship with a person, I don't talk to them about it. Mm-hmm. I use condoms, I know my body, I take antivirals, and if we're casually sexing, I kind of assume that they're casually sexing with other people too, and that I don't need to, and for me, that's not something that I would be comfortable with. It's not something I've ever been comfortable with since I got positive.
Yeah.
I had one time where I was intoxicated in the 12 years, and I slept with somebody without disclosing to them first. And I woke up the next morning and sort of put my hands on my head and got really freaked out and told them.
Fuck, why'd I do that? How did they receive it?
I mean, he was pretty cool about it. He was freaked out. Mm-hmm. He was for sure freaked out. Yeah. But he wasn't, like, mean or anything about it.
Right. And I mean, like, I'm not going to sit here and say that I haven't done it. And, like, in personal experience, like, the guilt with it is, it's not worth it. And, like, I've gone on around the time of doing this podcast, just, like, touching base with the women that I've had sex with and just been like, hey, I'm doing this thing, and, how are you about this? And they're like, oh, no, I don't have anything. And I've just been like, yes, okay, cool. And the excuse that I've given myself, excuses were being drunk or just drinking. Like, I'd have to drink a lot to not think about it. Or it'd be, oh, I'm using a condom, it's fine. And, like, you hear enough people say, well, just use a condom, well, just use a condom. And then, I mean, not to use any of those as excuses, but these were the excuses at this point in time in my life that I made for myself. And it's like, well, if they don't ask, you know, and that's where I think I really found myself being okay with that, was just like, well, you didn't ask if anything were to ever come up. And then at that point, like, I'm just shifting the responsibility onto someone else. So I say that, like, in hindsight. At the time, of course, I didn't know what I was doing, but there were instances where I would, like, not be able to get hard and just be like, I can't do this. And so, like, looking back at it, it's just it's not worth that feeling, because that feeling afterwards was, like, shitty. And then when I was able to talk to the women that I've slept with afterwards, I was just like, oh, cool. That's over with. And now I can go on and do this podcast and, like, tell other people, hey, don't do the same shit I made. Being drunk isn't an excuse. They didn't ask. I felt like that was a pretty legit one, but it's not. And, like, now I'm all, yeah, pro-disclose. And women I have disclosed to, I've heard Me Too on quite a few occasions. And, like, you can imagine just, like, what happens when you go for so long, like, not knowing, and then you sell someone and they're like, me too, and it's just like, close off right now. And so that feeling is way better than the latter. The latter feeling. Wait, is the latter the second thing or the first thing? We're just gonna say
it depends on the context.
Telling is better than not telling, and there we go.
It is, and part of what I wanted to say is just that, like, everyone copes differently and everybody sort of evolves. I mean, we all do, generally speaking. We evolve in every aspect of life. And how you cope with being a positive person is something that you cope with and you evolve. And I find one of the things I found recently in my life is that trauma affects us all, one, in very different ways, and two, we process it and learn from it and grow from it and deal with it. Like, grief, for trauma, including things like finding out you're positive, takes so much longer than we realize sometimes, because how you think about it or process it 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years later are completely different. And not everyone can cope with open disclosures. I've come in contact through positive singles with a lot of people who only will date from positive singles because they can't even fathom the idea of dealing with what could happen if they disclose to a person in person. And unfortunately, that's not something that you can get comfortable with until you do it. Like, I had lots of terrifying disclosures.
Yeah.
And where I was scared out of my mind, I've cried. Like, I do a lot of people are like, "Oh, just make it not a big deal." It is a big deal. I can't just disclose like, "Oh," and I mean, I have had those moments, and part of getting more comfortable with it is going through your times where it's really hard and scary, and then those times where somebody goes to give you their number at a bar and you text message them and are like, "Hey, I know you want to have coffee, but I have herpes. How do you feel about that?" And getting the response from that. And sometimes people are going to be jerks about it, and sometimes they're going to say, "What does that have to do with us having coffee?" Because I've had that happen. And I mean, having those moments is what really helps you realize that it's not all
it's
a dark space.
Talking about it, because it's funny you use words like scary, fear, and it. Recently, I don't know where the thought came from, but like the movie It, for example, is a really good analogy for what it is that we deal with. You know, granted, it itself is a big ass scary clown, but it also relates to the stigma behind herpes. And literally, like, if you watch the movie and imagine that the clown is herpes, like each kid is experiencing herpes on their own individually, and it's fucking terrifying. Like, they think they're gonna die, and then eventually when it's like, "Hey, do you see that too?" "Oh yeah, I see that." "Holy shit, you can see it too? Who else sees it?" And then you find out like your fucking closest circle of friends are seeing herpes too, and then all of a sudden, like, at the end of the movie, these kids are kicking this clown's ass. And like, that's how I now feel about the stigma behind, I mean, not just herpes but all STDs. And it's really, I'm not saying you gotta go out and like scream from the rooftops, "I have herpes" or "I have an STD," just to begin to accept it for yourself, you know. And once you're able to do that and maybe share with some people closest to you, you know, you never know who's going through something similar. And like, we as people need people to draw strength from in a lot of instances. And the first thing that a lot of people like to do is isolate themselves. If those kids continued to isolate themselves in that movie, they'd have been fucking killed by a clown. And in this case, it's like depression kicks in, anxiety, stress, the thoughts of suicide and self-harm and resentment and anger, all of these negative, fearful emotions as a result of just feeling like you're alone, because you're not. Like, I thought I was alone with it for 5 years, and then I'm like, oh shit, there's a dating site for people with herpes. And I can talk about that experience later.
And no, I felt the same. And actually, I didn't. The way I found the Facebook group was from Positive Singles. One of the people that I had met through Positive Singles was like, "Oh, do you know about the Facebook group?" And I was like, "What?
There's a Facebook group?"
And this is, yeah. I mean, well, because when I first found out and I went on my search online, there was like a website that you could go. Like, I guess it was some sort of a forum. I don't know. I don't think I ever got accepted into it, but I was 17 and had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
But you had to, like, answer this questionnaire before you could get accepted into the website. And then they, like, let you in, and nothing ever came from it. So it was, like, my one failed attempt at trying to find people dealing with what I was dealing with at the time.
And I think it's a double-edged sword, because the sooner you find other people who do have it or you can relate to, you tend to do one of two things. Like, you either lean heavily into it and like you lose yourself in being engaged with the groups, and you find that comfort there, or you're like, well, what would be a different situation there? I don't know, I lost my train of thought. But it's like, once you find those groups, you can either become comfortable and like, okay, I'm only going to date people in this community. You could even kind of become addicted to it, because I found myself in that situation where it was like, damn, there's all these hot girls who also have herpes, and it's just like, I can be myself. And when I started to become like addicted to, just being able to be myself, I was like, wait a minute, why am I not like this in the real world? Because it was like fantasy land to me at that point in time. And then you come out of that and it's like, I began to take little bit at a time out of that with me into reality, where it's just like, I'm able to be myself. Okay, now I'm more funny. Like even friends would tell me once I disclosed to a few close friends, and they were all like, dude, that's not a big deal. First off, I came to realize a lot of people don't even give a fuck. Once you tell them, it's like no one cares. And then you get to where like they're like, oh, dude, like one of my friends was like, oh man, that was funny. You're real funny. And it was just because like I wasn't able to be myself, but I was in myself around people with herpes. And then it was like, well, or the people who knew I had herpes. And then I was completely different around people who didn't know. So once I started to notice that, that's when I was like, okay, I need to like not do this thing.
That's part of that evolution, though.
Yes.
Like, you had to kind of get, like, find a place where you could be comfortable and be like, oh, this is what it can feel. This is how I feel about being on antidepressants. Because I feel like sometimes when you're constantly in a state of panic or depression, it's really hard to find that balance. And it's kind of the same thing. You find a place where you feel comfortable and safe. You sort of get to know it, appreciate that feeling a little bit. And then you start to work it into everyday life. And that's kind of what having herpes or coping with herpes or dating with herpes is like. And for some people it's not like that. Some people it's easy.
Yeah.
And they're like, I've been disclosing the whole time, I don't give a fuck.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna not be like, it happened, now I have to do it, so I'm gonna put it out on Front Street.
Yeah.
And some people don't. Some people it's a lot harder. For me it was a lot harder. I tried to find comfort in people who I was closer with a little bit, who knew me, who I knew were good people, and I don't know, like, cross my fingers and hope something good comes of it. I went through the whole, and then I hit the point where it was like, man, I prefer dating from positive singles just because it is more comfortable right now. And right now, I need comfortable. I need to feel secure. I need to feel confident. I need to feel good. Like, I don't want to have to worry about all of the guilt or the, what if somebody calls me up later and tells me that they're positive and I have to deal with that. Like, how many... Because that's, in a sense, that's kind of like you're opening yourself up to have to deal with somebody else's problems too. And if you're casually seeing people, that's a lot of emotional commitment to take on.
To something that's just supposed to be physical.
So sometimes you have to find that safe place where you can be comfortable and experience things and not have to worry about where you can, like not worry about, am I going to give them herpes of the eyeball because they fingered me and then touched their eye. You know what I mean? Like, because that's a thing, ocular herpes. It happens.
Yeah.
And I hit this point where I was like, I just want to be able to rub eyeballs without worrying about anything happening.
Exactly.
But I mean, it comes. I hope it comes. The people that it doesn't come for, I feel so bad. But we all cope in different ways. Like, some people literally aren't in places in their lives where they can comfortably disclose, period. Yeah. It freaks them out. Think about the scariest thing for you. Herpes is the scariest thing for them, and they can't do that. So I don't really fault people who are positive, who haven't hit a point where they can do that, because where they are is so incredibly terrifying.
Yeah.
We could talk about it, and I would, of course, always try to preach the comfort and finding the security and the confidence in being. But I think everybody has to kind of get there in their own way, and there are probably a lot of people who are going to be listening to this who are still in that really scared place where, and I think most people don't go into things viciously saying, I'm going to go around and give this to people. I think there are people who do that as well. I've seen people post about that on Facebook, like some people I knew when I was way younger, like seen them like basically openly say that's what they do. And I mean, for those people, all you can do is like,
you just send them positive vibes and leave it at that.
Yeah, that's really all you can do, and try to help the other people who can find a sense of happiness and security and comfort, and try to light their way up a little bit better, so they're not walking in such a dark area. You know?
Yeah, I get it. That's I was actually gonna ask you to leave us on a positive note, but that did it. So obviously you listened to the podcast and close this out pretty well. Do you have anything else that you want to leave the listeners with? Or was there something that you wanted to touch on that we haven't gotten to?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
Awesome. Well, Cassie, I thank you so much for your time, for being a guest and sharing your story with everybody. I Told y'all we were going to do this in 25 to 35 minutes going forward, and we're at 34 minutes and 48 seconds. So this concludes this episode of Something Positive for Positive People. Please go and like, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Podchaser, Podbean, Podbay. There's so many fucking podcast websites that you can listen to this podcast on. It's ridiculous. So I can be found on Instagram, Twitter, and Tumblr at H on my chest. If you like this episode, just tweet at me, shoot me a message, and let Cassie know how much you enjoyed hearing her story or how helpful it was to you. I get messages, maybe a couple of times a week from people who just thank a guest, and the guests are always really pumped and excited to hear about how they were able to help someone. So please send those in. If you have anyone you would like for me to reach out to or someone who may be interested in sharing their story on the podcast, please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I am always looking for guests. I am interviewing or speaking with any and everyone who is willing to share their story. So that all said, till next time, stay positive. Say peace out, Cassie.
Peace out.